I'm the Crusader, McKenzie Levi. I've been hanging out in this closed down old church here in downtown Lorain for the past couple years. In my sword club, use the basement to sword fight in. I got a workshop that I do woodworking. We do some video production stuff here. So I figured I'd take this opportunity to tell everybody a few stories that I have of my adventures that take a few minutes to tell. When I was living in Hollywood, California, I had written a script that took place during biblical times, and I was researching the production of that, and I came upon a museum in the Hollywood Hills. It was called the Holy Land Exhibition, and it was set up by a guy named A.F. Futterer, who had collected artifacts from the Middle East and brought them back and built this complex in the Hollywood Hills in the 1920s, and all these items were on display. So during the tour, the guide showed me a picture of A.F. Futterer being lowered down into a hole on a mountain by some Bedouins. And she explained that that was him being lowered into the cave that contained the location of the Ark of the Covenant. A.F. Futterer's theory is that the Ark was never removed from Mount Nebo after the prophet Jeremiah put it there in 587 BC. The second book of Maccabees states that the prophet Jeremiah and some others took the Ark of the Covenant out of the city of Jerusalem before it was sacked, and they took it to Mount Nebo, and they put it in a cave, and they walled up the tunnel that was inside the cave leading to the Ark. So there's no evidence that anyone took it out. There's no historical literature that says that the Ark was recovered. He went to the location on Mount Nebo where he thought it would be, and he found the hole that led to the cave. And inside the cave, he found a tunnel that was walled up with stones. And he said, okay, I need permission to go through this stone wall. So he went to the British, and they told him that it was going to be this much money, and he said, no, it's not about money, I'm going to leave my work for the next. This was compelling evidence and a compelling adventure for me. I tied it into my persona as a crusader because the Crusaders were not only warriors, but they also were archaeologists. There was excavations of relics that included the Lance of Longinus and the True Cross on the First Crusade. So I figured that if I did an archaeological quest, I could obtain my Crusader qualifications without being violent. So I set everything up and booked a trip. I was in medieval clothes. So when I arrived in Jordan, I was in chausses, brays, a tunic, and a cloak. I first went to the city of Amman, where I stayed for a couple days, and I went up to their old citadel, which is ancient ruins, huge stones, and I parkoured all over that. And the next day, I had a driver. Every hotel in Jordan has a driver or two waiting in the lobby to take you anywhere in Jordan. I had my driver take me to Mount Nebo, and at Mount Nebo I found that there was a church on top of the mountain where Moses had looked out and seen the Holy Land before he died. This is allegedly where the Ark of the Covenant is buried. So there's a bunch of people around this church because it's a tourist attraction, and I walked around the tourist attraction church with the tourists, and then I followed the instructions that I had accumulated over the course of my research, and I went to the Serpentine Cross, and I hopped over the railing, and then hopped over a little fence, and then I was out on the mountain in the wilderness, which is just sand and a few little pockets of trees. There's some houses, people are living there, and there's some wild dogs running around. So I start looking for this hole in the ground that will have the cave that will have the stone wall leading to the tunnel, leading to the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm walking for a little bit, and I'm starting to get kind of nervous because this mountain is huge, and there's no way I'm going to be able to find this hole on this mountainside. So I'm just about to give up and just figure that it was a really expensive trip that I went on to see these places. And I figured, you know what, I'm just going to follow the next sign that comes to me. And I heard one of these wild dogs bark, and I figured it was just as good of a sign as any. So I followed the sound of the wild dog. And before I got there, I came upon this little set of ruins that had an arch. And I said, all right, I'll go check that out. But before I got to it, I found the hole in the ground. And there was a big boulder stuck in it. But I knew it was the hole. So I stood there for a while and took a picture of it and went back to my driver and said, thank you for bringing me out there. He took me to Madaba, and then I hung out in Madaba for a week. I got another driver for my hotel in Madaba. He took me to all the Crusader castles around Jordan, and we went to the castle of Kerak, and I parkoured on that. And one of the Bedouin tour guides was telling some people that I was the ghost of a Crusader. So a week later, on the holy day, I had my driver take me back out to Mount Nebo, and I told him that I was going to spend the day there exploring. I had my appropriate linens on so that I could go into the holy place. I had linen breeches, a linen shirt, I had a linen cord, and I had a linen headdress. So on top of that, I had a black thobe that went down to my ankles, like a lot of the Muslim men were wearing around there, so I could disguise these linen medieval underclothes. And I had some chausses on so that I wasn't digging around and ruining my linen. My driver brought me to Mount Nebo, and I hopped over the railing, and I hopped over the little fence, and then I went along the mountainside till I found the hole with the boulder in it, and I took the boulder out. And I looked down and I could see that there was some trash in there, some litter, like water bottles and stuff. But as I looked deeper, I could see that there was markings on the wall and that it was a cave. I lowered myself down and found that I was actually in a cave. I came down and I was in a little room with the markings on the wall, and I took a left expecting there to be a big cave, and I found a little cave that was only about 15 feet deep. And it was pretty short, and I didn't see any tunnel. So I sat down for a while and thought about this mistake that I had made by putting this all together and coming all the way here, because surely I was now in the wrong cave, and there was no way that I was going to come out of this cave and go walk along the mountainside again and try to find another hole and try to find another cave. Like, I couldn't believe that I was in the wrong cave hole. So as I'm sitting there, I noticed that the walls and ceiling of this cave are covered with this concrete plaster mix. And I noticed that it's chipping off in some places. So I start to peel it a little bit, and then I noticed that the cave shape reduces down to a 4 foot by 4 foot, what looks like a tunnel entrance that could be blocked up and then plastered over. So I crawl over to there and I start peeling the plaster off the wall, and sure enough, underneath it I find stonework, and I figured that this must be the wall that Jeremiah had built that now had been covered with plaster. And so I started to take all the plaster off. It wasn't exactly quiet in this cave. I mean, I was really trying to get through this wall. I was kicking it, I was hitting it with the boulders I could find down there. I was really trying to figure out anything I could do to just break through this wall and just feel that cold draft of the tunnel and know that I could just push the rest of it down and crawl through and go find the Ark of the Covenant and whatever else that I had hoped was in my future if I discovered this item. I ended up just using small stones to just chip off the plaster all day, so that I exposed the whole stone wall that blocks up the tunnel that leads to the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. And it was 3 o'clock, and I knew my driver would be waiting for me, so I popped up out of the hole, which was no problem because of the parkour skills. And I replaced the boulder into the hole just the way that it was, and then I hopped back over the fence and hopped back over the railing and went back to the parking lot, and I'm covered in dirt and dust, and My driver's like, what have you been doing? And I say, exploring. Thank you very much. Can you bring me back tomorrow? I'm figuring the next day I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to go through this wall. So the next day I had my driver take me back, and I did the same thing that I did the day before. I hopped over the railing, then I hopped over the fence, and then I walked along the side of the mountain, and I came to the hole, and it still had the boulder in it. And I thought, just wait 1 minute before you pull that out. And no sooner had I thought that than I heard, "Hey!" And I looked over, and a uniformed police officer was hopping the railing and hopping the fence coming over to me. And he said, "Were you here yesterday?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Come with me." So he was quickly joined by 3 other tourist police officers that were in charge of this particular church area. And they all surrounded me and walked me in my black Thobade and tactical backpack and medieval underclothes to the little tourist police station right there. And inside there was about a dozen other police officers who were trying to figure out what I was doing. None of them spoke English, except for the one that had found me, but he only spoke a few words. So they were going through all my phone, and they were trying to get the footage from my GoPro, but it was just on a disc, and you can't watch the GoPro on the screen. They were showing me texts that I had sent to my sister saying, "Hey, I found the wall, I'm going to try to go through it tomorrow," and asking me what that is. And I was like, "Hey, it's just a metaphor." So then everyone was kind of settled down, and the officers were getting ready to take me away. And one of them had a computer finally, and he put my disc in it, and he said, wait. And the first guy calls me over and he says, "What is this?" And there's this footage of me inside the cave scratching at the wall and hitting it with boulders and trying to get through this wall to the tunnel. And I say, "Oh, it's just more of the same stuff you saw before." I got taken to the city of Mount Nebo and given to some plainclothes police officers who took me in, and they had a bunch of questions about my clothes and what I was doing, and I was not real forthcoming. I was just saying I was exploring a cave that Moses had been in or something, and sorry. So they processed me there, and then they handed me over to a soldier. We got in his pickup truck, and we picked up a few other soldiers, and we drove out to the desert and pulled up to this compound that had barbed wire and fences and this huge metal gate that they opened up, and they let us in, and 2 other soldiers got out, and the one took me to the main gate, and he brought me in this huge jail. And I'm kind of in this open courtyard area, and he tells me to stand there and wait. There's nothing going on at this jail because I guess it's a Muslim holiday. And this guy comes out, and he's in just a t-shirt and sweatpants. And he looks me up and down. He goes back to this office. I think I'm in big trouble here. I'm not going to make it home. This is going to be an international incident. So then this cat comes prowling in from outside and starts weaving in between my legs and purring. And I figured, okay, I'm going to be okay. And the soldier shoos this cat away. And then they bring me into the office where this guy, who it was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, is sitting at this huge desk. He's the magistrate. So, and in his office too are the police officer from Mount Nebo and the police officer from the tourist police station on Mount Nebo, and the soldier. And the magistrate starts asking me questions. He says, "You're American?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What were you doing?" And I tell him that I was just in the cave exploring, praying and thinking about Moses. And he says, "Are you of a particular religion?" And I said, "I'm not doing this about religion. I was just exploring." And he pulled out the hammer out of my tactical backpack. And I said, "That's just in case something happened." And the magistrate said, "Do you speak in Arabic?" And I said, and he looked at me and thought for a few minutes, and then said, "We're sorry, here's your passport, you're free to go." So he hands me my passport, and I say, "Well, how am I going to get home from the middle of the desert here?" And he says, "Don't worry, we'll give you a ride." So the police officer from Mount Nebo gave me a ride, and he was pleasant, and we talked the whole way, and they dropped me off at my hotel, and inside the hotel, my driver was waiting for me in the lobby, and he said, "Hal, we were so nervous about you, we heard you got arrested," and I didn't know what to do, and I gave him a pretty big tip for his worry. And then I retired to my room and decided I would figure out what I was going to do. I figured the two options were to go back under the cover of darkness, probably with some help of somebody I was going to have to hire from town with a sledgehammer and lights and a mess. Or I could try to obtain permission from the Department of Antiquities from the country of Jordan and do it the correct way. So the Department of Antiquities of Jordan requires that a cultural institution be backing your archaeological excavation and that you have 3 archaeologists who have 3 digs and published writings. So I did pursue backing from cultural institutions. I talked to the Cleveland Art Museum, I talked to the colleges in the area, I talked to some actual archaeologists, I talked to a Templar researcher, and still everyone just thought I was a crazy person. So I couldn't get the financial backing because I don't have the archaeologists, and I can't get the archaeologists because I don't have the financial backing. So I have not been back to the Middle East since. Will I go back to finish my excavation of the Ark of the Covenant? We'll see.